do abortion. We could do abortion. Yeah, I don't mind.
I don't do abortion.
You don't do abortion?
No, you can do God's
Okay.
existence.
You just said want to do cross verse. I don't do fiction. We
I
could
do
do
not. I
actually
don't do.
theology. We could do theology real quick.
You
We could do
can do
God's.
God's existence. I just proposed that. Is that one of your mutual topics?
I love booty, bro.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
right. So we
I'm
can do
Jeff.
God's existence.
Go to the
Yo,
group
We can do
chat.
God. Yeah, yeah. Hold on. Everybody
Okay.
else. Just real quick.
Look at this
Everybody
catfish.
you can do
else.
God's existence,
Everybody
man.
else. Shush. Okay, we're gonna do God's existence, right? I'll just be affirming an atheistic stance. What about you?
Then I'll just take a theistic stance. I'm going
Dude,
to use
dude,
physical
wait,
arguments.
Siba. I want to tell you something. Just say atheist stance. You don't have to put istic at like the end of every like philosophical word.
I personally do not care. All I'm focused on is blittering in the slow chair right now.
Nigger.
So yeah, okay. I don't care. Stop interrupting the debate. So I'm gonna say this real quick. I'm gonna ask you what makes you, or just in general, what makes a theistic sense, of course, more truthful than an atheistic sense. Can you go ahead?
Because I think it has better arguments, which I'm going to
Okay.
present.
And so I'm gonna ask you real quick. Um, do you believe that in order for a system to actually have preservation of truth, do you think it would have to fulfill those said truth conditionals to actually have a truth, or just something grounded in substance?
I guess both. Both.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask you a question. Do you think an argument is a system for theism?
Wait, what? Okay, what's the
Do you
question
think?
again?
Yeah, the question, just in case you weren't tracking, was: do you think an argument can be a system for theistic accounts?
Yeah.
Okay, so when we use the term system, I'm saying like, oh yeah, so something which must be true, must be this and that, in order to preserve the truth, therefore creating a valid system, right? So the thing is that there of course is more than just, oh yeah, God exists for a system of course God existing, right? Because like when we define the term God, like what is the terminology for God you're using? Like, can I get some formal clarification on that?
Terminology. What is terminology?
You
Sorry
don't know
for
what
that.
terminologies. You don't know what
No,
terminology is. Okay, yeah.
no.
So terminology is a thing which we use to represent something through descriptors, which would be, say, for example, I define this to be analytically well, not defined. I could sit here and say this is analytically the case, which would be a descriptor to describe something. That would be terminology, which we use. That is what terminology is, a set of descriptors which we use for something.
So basically, a definition.
Yeah. So, what is your definition of God here? And if I
A
may ask,
maximal good being.
a maximal is being okay. So, I'm gonna ask you a question. Again, is another question for the sake of God, because more so this is adding more truth conditionals towards you. So when you say, of course, when you say a greatly maximal being, do you affirm like other concrete things, like or concrete properties which come with the being, like say for example omnipotence, teleological status? Would you be affirming teleology within God's nature or ontology? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, so I believe I'm like I'm also gonna present an argument because I'm the one who actually affirmed, more so like, oh yeah, God's existence is not the case. That's the first proposition I made. So I'm gonna sit here and say this. Do like I believe is just more ontologically parsimonious, because assuming something to be more complex in structure, say for example teleology, omnipotence, that offers more complexity than there is to simplicity, and simplicity would offer something else which is more simpler and less packed in terms of concrete things. So we would favor a being with less of those properties, and you already analytically define God to be someone with these said or X traits. So I think it's just
Yeah.
more ontologically parsimonious, conditional of ontological parsimony. So I'm going to ask you a question. Is there any like problem with the functionality of ontological parsimony? Because this would also determine some type of validity within the argument, talking about this metaphysical view of God's existence. So Q, go ahead and list a problem with the usage of ontological parsimony.
Okay, so I just think that if it is the case that God doesn't exist, then we'd encounter problems. So I just think it's rational to posit He does exist. You are right that it contains less assumptions in the idea that God does not exist. But if we posit that, then we run into the problem of Why does anything exist at all?
Okay, so just a quick refutation, real quick. No, because there's obviously other, instrumentalist type views on that. So, say for
Okay.
example, we can also create an argument, like, say for example, for consciousness being the, obviously the arbitrary, like ultimate cause for reality. Like, say for example, I can say because all these minds would obviously have to be concrete if we do accept the reality being physical, and then obviously because there's multiple necessary beings in terms of that, that would just contradict them causing one another, and that would be multiple ultimate causes. So I think there would have to be one singular cause, and because obviously a concrete thing like, of course, reality idea I just suggested with consciousness, I think one singular consciousness explaining something would offer much more than just a singular thing like God's existence, obviously, because we accept a metaphysical view with a concrete being, and ontological parsimony is more so favored in terms of consciousness here because of the argument I'm using. Consciousness basically just states, well, not just states, sorry, consciousness has less favorable, how do I say this? Like, not less favorable, but more favorable, less concrete entities than, of course, God's existence and the concrete entities of human beings, more so of that. And I just think through that
You're not
functionality,
talking.
it's just adding more substance to my argument. So I'm going to ask you a question. Is there any type of problem you can actually derive from the consciousness argument I just provided, which is supposed to be an anti-real estate for God's existence? Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think I need to do that because you didn't even track what I was saying. I was saying just because your argument has lesser entities that can be more ontologically posthumous, but this doesn't matter when your stance leads to more problem while my stance doesn't. The problem that your stance leads to is the question of how anything can exist at all. We can
Yeah.
conclude.
So no, we're not concluding yet because I have
Yeah,
more so of another response towards that. You said I didn't track what you said, even though I just provided another argument, which is an anti-realist against God's existence, and
yeah, it
answers the
doesn't
question where
matter.
it come from.
It
No,
doesn't
no, no,
matter
hold on, hold on,
since
hold on, hold on.
you
No,
you
you're not
encounter
going to
problems
derail to
though.
try and escape
You
this, right? Because I said that multiple. I already gave an argument which would obviously go into the favor of ontological parsimony and debunks a concrete reality with God, for an example. And that consciousness argument would literally answer the question where we come from. We literally come from a subjective experience, right? That's the reason why I asked, oh, yeah, can you go ahead and give the problem with it? If you're not going to give the problem, despite it already answering that said question or fixing that said error, which is supposedly coming from my stance, or more so just the functionality of ontological parsimony, I want you to sit here and justify, even though the dialogue which we already have involving this said argument about consciousness, can you go ahead and provide to me
well,
why that would not be relevant despite already answering the question? Can you prove to me why it does not answer the question? Because
yeah,
that indeed,
yeah,
wait,
man,
hold
you're
on,
not tracking. We
hold
can
on.
conclude that. I already answered that. We can
No, you
conclude.
did not. You
We're
just
gonna
repeated yourself. You repeated yourself like a
Yeah, yeah,
retarded moron.
yeah. You
You didn't
also
understand.
repeated yourself. That's why you can conclude, you
can you tell
dumbass.
me what
No,
happened? Wait, can I hear
Yes,
what happened? What happened?
you just nigga shut the fuck up. Get the fuck out of my VC, kid. Yeah. Anyways, more so speaking wise, I did not repeat myself. I just countered your point. That's not a repetition of my previous point. I just repeated and explained it meta in terms of meta dialogue why that would already counter your point. And I'm not looking to go on a meta tangent and like, oh yeah, my point obviously doesn't counter your point. I want to get into the substance of the argument, which basically just shows, of course, consciousness is not capable of being a actual cause for reality. See, you're refusing to go against that. I just want you to go ahead and show some type of critical error within the argumentation standard or what the standard is being upheld as, which the standard is basically saying reality is a subjective experience, therefore it comes from consciousness. That's the problem which is fixed that we of course your problem which was identified was that God's existence would lead to where do we come from, despite I already gave like a valid answer, just like I wouldn't say valid unless you can prove it's invalid. More so just of course a more so robust answer which fixes another problem which you I already identified. So I just want to know where it does not fix this problem. Like you're saying I repeated myself, right? I just want the problem to see like if my argument does not fix the problem, right? Because clearly it answered the question. I think it already met the criteria for that. I just want some type of actual sufficient substance to try and prove me wrong, right?
That can just be interrogated with my argument. If reality is just a case, it's just like subjective experiences and therefore comes from consciousness, then that will be the something. Yes, we can conclude, man.
So you just said subjective experience does not come from consciousness.
No, no, nigga, you're not tracking. I'm saying,
No, I'm
if it is,
asking you.
if
Yeah, what the
I'm
fuck?
saying, I'm interrogating it with my argument. You're saying that reality is subjective experiences, therefore comes from consciousness. Then I'm saying that in my then I responded and said, in my worldview, that will just be the something that reality comes from. I didn't say that.
Okay,
We can conclude.
so okay, I'm
We
gonna
can
say
conclude.
okay, you're talking about your worldview. I already gave a reductive towards your worldview, which would make it seem to collapse, right? So when you say, "Oh yeah," in my worldview, despite the worldview already being collapsed, I don't see how that's gonna actually uphold your point at all, despite you not really countering my argument. Besides, you sitting here saying, "Oh yeah, my argument for God," which would obviously be, of course, which obviously you didn't even give an argument because I'm the one who just sat here and gave an argument towards
Oh,
you. Obviously using the principle
I
of
did give
ontological.
the argument. I literally said at the beginning of the debate that I'm going to use the same argument that I just used against GC or tracking, nigga. We can conclude. You're just yapping now.
You know what? Sure, we can conclude. We could also do
This,
polls.
bro, why?
You wanna do polls?